You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Matt McGackie, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you've ever wanted to sneak backstage and share a beer with one of your favorite musicians, well, Vox and Hops is the podcast for you. This week on the podcast, I dropped a killer episode with Kelly Schaefer of Atheist. There is this episode and over 440 other ones to help you enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. So what are you waiting for? It's time to become a Vox and Hops head. Cheers!
What's up, everybody? Here is another episode for your ears. Super stoked to bring this to you, and super stoked that you're listening. I don't have as much house cleaning to do on this one as I have on others, so suffice it to say, if you like the show, and you've been enjoying it, and you're going to buy some gear, if you're going to buy it from Reverb or Sweetwater, consider using the affiliate links I have. If you could go to tonemob.com/reverb or tonemob.com/sweetwater for all of your purchasing needs and all of your gear desires. That comes back and helps the show and puts a little bit in my pocket and doesn't cost you anything extra. All you have to do is go to tonemob.com/sweetwater or tonemob.com/reverb for that, and the links are in the show notes in case you are forgetting. Also, if you would like more of this nonsense streamed to your ears, there is always Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/tonemob, and for just $5 a month, you will get extra episodes every week, usually in the form of extended interviews with that week's guest. It's a lot of fun. Some of the best content that I've done is over there, and there are so many extra bonus episodes that you will unlock by simply going there. Wow, got that busted out relatively quickly. So let's just get into this episode with Dan from Old Blood, somebody I've been wanting to get on for a long time. Old Blood Noise Endeavors makes great pedals. If you haven't heard of them and you're a pedal geek, I'm very surprised. But if you have, that's probably why you're listening to this now. So let's go for it. Let's get into it. Let's find out more. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about guitars and stuff occasionally. Sometimes it's about other things, too. With me today, I have Dan Pechacek from Old Blood Noise, and I just realized before we started recording that the last time I recorded with anyone from Old Blood that my house almost burned down, and now I'm in the middle of all these crazy fires. Well, I'm not in the middle. We're on the safe side, but just got done dealing with all these crazy fires, and it's like, why not do another episode with Old Blood for, continuity's sake?
We'll aim for no fires this time.
I mean, I think we aimed for that last time. It was just
That's true. We'll aim for some fires and hope to miss. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this works. Yeah, no, I don't know. Things are crazy. That's all I know. That's all I can really say for certain. But you're an interesting person to have on for a lot of reasons, but one of them being, I know you listen to a lot of the episodes. Sometimes, well, most of the time, guests don't listen to all that many episodes, so they don't know the run through, and they don't know the odd rabbit holes that this tends to go down. But I feel like you've already had a good crash course on it.
I've heard you talk to many people and go down a lot of rabbit holes, and going into this, I'm like, man, I have no idea where we're going to end up. We'll find out, I guess.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Well, we've met, I don't know how many times we've met at this point, at least 2 or 3 at various conventions and whatnot. But I really don't know that much about you other than you work for Old Blood Noise and you really like music and guitar stuff. So where did that start? What's your backstory? What got you into this? How'd you end up at Old Blood?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of like where to start. I mean, in terms of playing guitar, that was like a middle school thing where my dad just kind of at some point was interested in like learning to play the guitar. And so he got one of those like, kind of student like starter acoustics and started taking some lessons. And so there was just a guitar around the house. And in 5th grade, I signed up to play viola in the school orchestra and actually ended up playing viola like all the way through my senior year of high school, and then basically not picking it up since then, which is a bit of a shame, really. But I like was kind of interested in stringed instruments from that. And then there was this guitar just kind of around the house that I would just kind of pick up and play around with, and kind of interest ebbed and flowed. And then in like 7th or 8th grade, I don't know, it just kind of, at one point it just, something clicked and I was like, man, I want to play guitar all the time. And was listening to a lot of, I feel like Weezer and Dashboard Confessional were like the first 2 bands that I was like wanting to learn a lot of songs of. So it was simultaneously like big distorted, you know, crunchy power chords, and then like open tuned sad acoustic songs, which kind of still follows through to this day in terms of like the 2 things I like to play. So yeah, kind of starting there and just like starting to write songs in high school, going away to college and continuing, mostly doing solo stuff, but working with my buddy Ben, who he went to the high school across town, but we met kind of in late high school era and started collaborating on some stuff. And if you may have heard my band, but my band is called Plain Speak, and he's still like my partner in that. We've just been good friends for a very long time, and kind of musical partners for over a decade now, I guess. That's crazy.
I know, it's weird when you start like I'm like, I remember 15 years. Wait a minute, what? How many years ago? How old am I? What is going on right now? I know the feeling.
I'm trying to like think of the scope of from, you know, 6th grade when I first picked up a guitar to now when I'm like doing algorithms for effects pedals. I'm like, man, what is my story? So I guess to fast forward then to 2013, I had gone to school in Michigan and moved to Washington, D.C. for a couple of years because my girlfriend, now fiance, in a month she'll be my wife, which is very exciting.
Ooh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, she had gotten an internship with the Smithsonian, and we moved out to D.C. for a couple of years. And Ben and I had been kind of working on this album like long distance, like whenever I could come visit, and, you know, just writing songs and bouncing them back to him and going into his studio to record as many drums as we could in one day and all that stuff. And in like early 2013, he and his girlfriend were living in Moore, Oklahoma, and it was hit with a big F5 tornado that some people listening may be familiar with, because it was just an absolutely devastating tornado. And basically it completely leveled their house. They were okay, but it took the house all the way down to the foundation, along with the couple hard drives that had our album on it. So it was this weird, like, small tragedy among a much larger tragedy. But it kind of became this catalyst where I was like, I feel like I need to move back to Oklahoma, at least for a little while, and like do a long distance thing and like work on remaking this album and trying to play shows and like trying to see if I can make music a thing. That was kind of a big flex point for like me as a musician, being like, I'm going to, you know, make a big move and dedicate a lot of myself to doing this. But the twist of it is, at the time, Ben was working for Mammoth Electronics, which I know you'll be familiar with, probably a lot of the listeners. It's like they're not around anymore, but they were this big parts supplier in Norman for a lot of like all kinds of companies, effects pedal companies. And so when I moved back, he was able to get me a job at Mammoth, which was my kind of surprise entry into the world of effects pedals, because I was already a bit of a nerd about them, but then suddenly there was this like place for me in the industry, even though I was just like racking up enclosures for powder coating. You know, it was very much just like a manufacturing job, but it was like, oh, this is amazing. Like this, you know, I'd be racking up a pedal and be like, oh, I've heard of this pedal before. And
little sidebar, what a lot of the listeners probably don't know, and now I can finally say is I was doing their social media. So
oh yeah. I forgot about
that. Not at the same time, I don't think, as you were there. I think you had moved on to Old Blood by the time
I think
started
at that point,
doing that.
yeah.
But yeah, I a lot of people don't know that, but it's like, yeah, that was me. And it was a combination of me and Scott from Stringjoy, because we work on everything together, basically.
Oh,
And,
that's funny. I knew that you and Scott worked on a bunch of stuff, but I didn't realize that he was part of the Mammoth social media account. That's funny.
yeah, he ran it. I ran it for a long time by myself, and then we got another client, and so we kind of switched things around, and he ran it basically up until they closed. It was him for the last probably year, maybe year and a half, somewhere in that ballpark. So yeah, a lot of people didn't know that, but NDAs and stuff, but NDAs don't matter when the company's not around anymore. So
yeah, yeah, probably a lot of Mammoth related gossip stuff that it's like, can I talk about that? I don't know. They're not around anymore.
Hey, what are they going to do? Sue me? They don't exist. we can get into that later.
Yeah, I was going to say we can. Yeah, and feel free to stop me at any point if you've got questions about my very like truncated paraphrased version of my entire history. But yeah, so like ended up at Mammoth, and then ended up working in a position like doing inventory stuff. So doing the purchasing for all the parts and everything. They just kind of needed somebody to do that like full time. And so I kind of interviewed within the company and bumped up to that position and did that for, I don't know, probably like a year and a half. And I was still working at Mammoth when Seth and Brady started Old Blood, because that would have been, I think, August of 2014, which was actually also when Plainspeak put out our debut album, like the recreation of that album that we'd lost and then put back together. Also, we put that out in August 2014 as well. So just kind of an interesting like parallel there. Actually, I had a prototype or a demo unit of the Black Fountain on my board at our like album release show, like right before it came out, which was a lot of fun. Just to, I don't know, it's a fun connection point to look back on. Because I was friends with those guys, and then in 2015, summer of 2015, lost the job at Mammoth, which is a whole thing that we can we can talk about off air.
Okay, all right, juicy.
Yeah, it was one of those. It was just a mess of a situation, and ended up like losing the job and just being like, wow, I did not expect to lose that job. And so kind of reeling from that, I just ended up like talking with Seth and Brady, and they were like, well, you know some about like kind of parts procurement, the purchasing and like inventory management side of things. And since they were, a year out and starting to grow, they were like, maybe we can bring you on part-time to help out with some of that stuff. And so that for the first like couple years of the company was basically like doing all the inventory stuff and then learning how to run the drill press and do the screen printing. And so I was doing a lot of the kind of enclosure processing stuff. Like I would drill them and then we'd get them powder coated elsewhere, and then they'd come back and I'd screen print them and just manage all the parts inventory. And then I was just making a choice of whether to talk about like a very personal thing, because I don't want things to get too like sad too fast. But I feel like it's an important point. In 2016, my mom, she'd been fighting cancer for about 9 months, and she passed away. And obviously, that's just a huge tragedy for anybody to go through. And kind of later that year, I found that I started getting really interested in like knowing how effects pedals work. And looking back on it, I feel like there was an element of like, I need to like take my interest and like dive deep, pull it apart and understand it, because other things felt sort of too big to understand. And so I wasn't conscious of that choice, but just looking back, I'm realizing that I think there was a lot about like getting into the nitty gritty of electronics and coding that was almost like a calming kind of therapeutic thing for me, of like, this is something I can dig into and understand. And
almost like something I can't control this other stuff, but I can control this.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
this and manage it, you know.
This is something that like brings me joy, and I can figure out how to maybe make it do some other things or bring me more joy and maybe bring other people joy. And, you know, so I was mostly I was like reading the Wampler books from way back when, and just kind of other things that were just like, here's how an op amp works. Here's how you create distortion or tone control or things like that. And was just kind of doing this outside of Opla just as kind of a general interest. But I would occasionally ask Brady questions about things, and he basically was like, hey, you seem like you're interested in this, and what we could really use is somebody else doing some of the FV1 stuff. The FV1 being the digital chip that a lot of our stuff and just a lot of all kinds of effects are based on that chip. And so he kind of set me up with like, here's the software and some kind of basics of how it goes. Just maybe spend like a couple hours a week at work to play around with it and see if you take to it. And I was a creative writing major in college, but I took some computer science classes. At Michigan State, they didn't have minors really, but they had cognates, which were almost like mini minors. And so I had a cognate in computer science. So just having that little bit of background, something about the FV1, which it has its own like specialized programming language, but something about it just gelled, and I kind of quickly steamrolled into like we were about to start working on the XS, and it was like suddenly I was making a delay and a chorus to go in the XS, and then early the next year I was working on the Flatlight and Dweller, and it was just like suddenly I had switched from I still run the inventory, but I'd switched from inventory and drilling and screen printing and all these other things to inventory and really like 60-70% of the time product design. Yeah, I think that's the
explains it all
arc
guy
of the story. Yeah. Oh yeah. And then yeah, that started too. I forget often that I'm public facing too. Like I'll be at like one of the deli stomp box and somebody will ask me a question. And one person like asked me once about, it was just some particular question. They were like, I know you've already explained this pedal to me, but can you tell me about this part of it? And that's like, right. Pause for a second. Like, what do you mean I already explained it to you? You just walked up. Oh, right. The videos. Yeah.
Yeah, I do those.
And yeah, that kind of grew alongside just getting interested in stuff. The first one we did was about the XS and the series and parallel routing. And then that just kind of became our format for how we do tech demos. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun to explore what I think of as a character. Like it's just me, but I like to think that Dan from Dan Explains It All is like a slightly different version of me. So it's fun too.
He seems like a slightly different version of you. He's a little more, I don't know what the word would be. How would I describe it? Maybe he's just a little more. Maybe it's the best way to describe him.
It's the classic, like, oh no, it's not me. It's just a character based on me. Oh, what's the character like? Well, it's me, except a little bit more.
It's me with a magnifying glass held up to
yeah, exactly. I feel like he's also somewhat grumpy. The amount of times that we've like started shoots where he like walks in and sees the light and it's like, oh man, I've got to explain another thing. And right. Flips on the light and has to go through 10. Yeah. He's a much grumpier person than I am, I think.
Yeah. Well, even doing this podcast, I'm still me. Like you've met me, like, but like, there is a little bit of, I'm a little bit, this is kind of going to sound kind of strange because I'm not the most eloquent speaker in the world, but I'm more eloquent on the podcast, whereas I'm just kind of a redneck who says things like crick and warsh in real life. So I try to be a little more precise with my speaking, even though I'm stumbling over myself all the time. So that probably sounds ridiculous to a lot of the listeners, but I'm doing my best over here because Hillbilly Blake is a real thing. And I try to suppress him a little bit on the podcast because then no one would know what I was talking about.
Yeah, there's something about having a focused conversation of like, okay, we're going to talk for an hour that like just kind of focuses you up in a weird way. I don't know if I'm speaking any differently, but I'm very cognizant of the fact that I keep saying like. So there's definitely something different about being on mic versus just, having a chat off mic. So
For sure. There's some things that I say that have been pointed out to me over the years that are just grammatically completely incorrect. And I'm just like, well, I mean, I don't know if I can do anything about that, but I've gotten better. So, and it has translated out into real life as well, because sometimes, when I'm just having like a buddy conversation and we're just chilling, that's different. But like what the podcast has made me better at is in serious situations, we're like, oh, we have to have a discussion about this. I'm much clearer with my speaking than I used to be. It's a weird byproduct that I didn't expect.
It's good though. Yeah, I guess it's just you're developing communication skills, and so those can be applied. Yeah, in the podcast world and in the world of just having a serious conversation about something.
I used to be in high school and stuff. I was really pretty good at public speaking, and I wonder if I would get any better or if I would be worse at it now. I think I would be better as far as like my actual speaking skills, but I think I would be worse because I'm used to just staring at a microphone with nobody staring back at me, even though I'm interviewing somebody. So if I had a bunch of eyeballs on me all of a sudden, I wonder if I would get weird. That didn't used to bother me, so I'm not sure. But it's just a weird thing I've thought about before. I'm like, could I public speak?
Yeah,
I don't know if I could do it anymore. Strange times.
Yeah.
Yeah, pre-COVID, I was actually going to go to, what made me even think about that is I was going to go to a school. I was invited to a school by a local school by a listener, Brandon. I think I say his last name right, Souse. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Sorry, Brandon. And he was like, yeah, you want to come speak to my students because he teaches music at a local school. And I was like, about what? Like, what do you mean? And he was just like, oh, like different paths in the music industry. And I was like, oh, actually, okay, I think I can talk about that because, and you yourself too, like you think of the music industry and you think of Beyonce or some sort of performer like a kid does, right?
Yeah.
But there's so much more. There's so many other career paths. If you want to be involved in music, you can, and you don't have to be the performer if you don't want to be.
I think it took me a while to kind of reconcile the idea that like I moved back to Oklahoma to be a musician and, for whatever reason, just like, not having the sheer hustle or the talent or whatever the thing is, that didn't pan out. But then I was simultaneously working in the music industry, technically from the time that I started working at Mammoth. That was it. Pretty far disconnected, but it was like it over the course of the next few years, suddenly I was more and more connected until eventually I was actually, designing pedals that musicians are using. And it was a weird realization of, oh, wait, I ended up working in the music industry. This was my goal, but I didn't realize this was a path to it, So same thing here. It actually took me a while to realize that that's what I was doing. I was like, no, I'm podcasting. I'm a podcaster, which is its own industry, of course, but everyone I talk to is music related. Everything that I do is music related. I work in the music industry, and it's weird to wrap my brain around that. Even like if you would have told young Blake, who was obsessed with music and that's all he cared about, that you are going to work in the music industry, I'd have been like, how? What do you mean? Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just a consumer. So it's wonderful though. It's wonderful that there are so many avenues, and I hope people who are passionate about this kind of stuff figure out their own path, because it's not always being the drummer or being the guitar player or being the singer. Sometimes it's making the pedals that the guitar player uses and draws inspiration out of. Like, who knows how many thousands of different songs you've inspired, directly through your creations. It's a crazy thing to think about. Yeah, it's nuts. Yeah. Yeah, it's like when I think about it, it's like I was basically just from the point that I got interested in effects pedals, like when I got a looper and was like, "Ooh, how can I layer different sounds without them kind of like muddying each other up or like creating, I was doing solo shows with a loop pedal, and that first moment of like, how do I craft sound to better convey my musical ideas? It's like, yeah, that was the interest the whole time. And so here is just a different but very similar thing of like, how do I craft sound to help others develop musical ideas? How do I make a pedal that to me sounds really interesting, because when I play through it, I feel inspired by it, and then put that out into the world in hopes that others will be too. It's just so funny looking back and being like, yeah, kind of all along, I just like was interested in guitar sounds, like, and I thought that to do that for a living, I would have to be like a famous, songwriter for a band, but I didn't have to.
No, but the famous songwriters for bands, they need people like you too. I was just talking to my wife last night about this. She's, she doesn't really get the whole pedal thing, even though she's like surrounded by it and sees pedals. She doesn't really understand like the actual level of importance, because most of her favorite artists are very stripped down and, acoustically driven and stuff. And she's like, well, this guy didn't need pedals. And I was like listening to the recording, like, yeah, but he's still using effects, whether he's using them on his guitar or not. Like, listen, there's reverb on that guitar. Like, like he still needed something. Yeah, sure. The song's great on its own and doesn't need anything but the instrument. But, trying to explain to her like why this stuff is kind of important and what it's actually, how it's impacting the industry, or not just the industry, but music as a whole. I mean, there's a whole movie being made on it, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
like the pedals are important. That's what I keep telling myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the thing that like the listener's not going to know, but we might, we're going to notice specific nuances and things, but like the quote unquote listener, the idea of the mainstream listener is not going to hear anything, whether it's the songwriter who was inspired by a pedal to write a thing, or the producer that applied effects to that acoustic guitar to just, make it sound better, more, so that mainstream listener might enjoy it more without even knowing why. All these steps along the way where the pedals are probably influencing the fact that you're hearing that thing and enjoying it, whether you're able to process it or not. Like, I think back to in middle school, I was a huge fan of Blur and still am to this day. But the way that I listen to the band has really changed over the, however many years, to the point where like now I'm just kind of focusing in on like, oh man, that sound that like Graham is getting is just wild. I wonder what effects he was using, or what, how his setup was. Whereas in middle school, I was just hearing the songs in a way where I wasn't even picking out individual parts. It was just like, I like these songs. And now I can go back and dig deep and realize there were all these really special things happening that I didn't even notice at the time.
Yeah, that's making me think back to when I was a kid, and it's a weird thing that I've always had, but I didn't know how to describe. I was always very into I had to like the song first, clearly, but I was always very into the way it was constructed, physically. I was like, how, because like I had a guitar and I couldn't make it sound like, insert band here. I like, it doesn't sound like that at all. Why can't I got distortion, but it's not the right distortion, and I didn't know about down tuning. I didn't know about anything about like creating tone. And I think that's why I became so obsessed with it later in life. It was like, oh, I found the answers, and oh, there's more, but there's always more. And it's a never ending quest. This is wonderful. But like, I just remember as a kid, like trying to figure out like how like System of a Down got their guitar tone, and that information just wasn't, you couldn't just Google it, it wasn't there. So it's always been a weird interest of mine that, I don't know, somehow it's taken over my life in a very strange way. But I did want to ask you a question, because you've had a kind of an interesting ride getting to where you're at today. What is it like working at Old Blood Noise every day? It seems like it could be, I have like this image of what it would be like, but like I talked to Joel and he's like, we have the beer policy. And I just like look at you guys and I'm like, they look like they would like just kind of all be off by themselves. I don't know. What's it like?
So it's a weird time to ask that because I have been working from home since March. um,
Right. Well,
but
okay.
if we rewind to February and before, it's a kind of a mix of both things, because there's those collaborative moments where um, say I'm working on something and it's playing through an amp rather than my headphone setup, and somebody hears it and walks in and asks me a question about it. And then we kind of dive in on like, oh yeah, maybe it could do, like, we might end up developing a new feature for something, or, whatever. There's that very collaborative process of just, as we're all kind of moving through the shop, just seeing each other, hanging out. The build room at various times will have podcasts or music going that like everybody's listening to, but then other times everybody will just be on their headphones, kind of just focused in on their own world. So I don't know, it's a little bit of everything. I think we kind of have the same, I don't think it's as explicit as Joel's beer policy, but it's the same deal. Just everybody be safe about it. You want to drink a beer in the afternoon? Well, that's fine, as long as you're doing the job.
Right.
So yeah,
as long as it doesn't turn into 7.
Yeah, it's a pretty it's a really fun work environment without interfering with the actual work of it. It's more just a good sort of collaborative workspace that I think we're all kind of missing now, because a lot of people are back at the shop, but like me and Seth and Kylan are still mostly working from home just because we are still able to. And so it's like, if the job doesn't really require you to be there every day, then we're trying to maintain distance and be safe about everything. And everybody that's there is, wearing masks and sanitizing, and, we're all just trying to get through it. So it's definitely 2020 working at Old Blood is very different, because I'm just chatting to you from my office, where my office mate is my dog Olive. And
Hello, Olive.
I've been working on, like new stuff. Like there's a thing that I kind of started earlier this year, that then largely got developed while I was at home. And so I brought a pretty close to working prototype. Like we're chasing some noise issues and some different things. But I was able to bring it to the shop and kind of show Brady and Isaac, like, yeah, so here's kind of roughly what it does. And it was like their eyes kept lighting up, or they would discover this new thing. And I realized, oh, right. Normally throughout this process, everybody's hearing it, or I'm going around showing it to everybody at the office at regular intervals. But this was one that I just kept plugging away on, and they trusted, like, yeah, Dan's must be making something that sounds good. So it was a very different experience to get to kind of show them this almost done thing, and realize, oh, right, I'm the only one that's really heard much of it at this point.
That's interesting, because I imagine there's a way more back and forth, like with a normal process. You're just in your hole, just kind of like lost, which it might be kind of interesting to see what you do, largely on your own versus having the input. Not saying that one method is better than the other. It'll just be interesting to see what comes out of it, because it is so different.
Yeah. And there's been some kind of moments along the way, like with Dweller and Visitor. Those were both kind of moments where I was like, guys, what if we did something kind of like this? And we had we kind of all had an initial discussion of like, yeah, it could be parallel modulations, and one is kind of pushing and pulling on the other. And so it's like, okay, great. And then I kind of, even though I was at the shop at the time, I still kind of just put on headphones and dove into my hole and came back with these programs. It was like something like this. And then, and then we tweak from there. But yeah, it's funny when they're on the couple times that there has been that thing of like, first 20% collaborative, and then like I dive in deep and get it like 60% further, and then we bounce back for the last 20% to like, okay, is this all cool? Does any of this need to be reined in or pushed further, or whatever it might be? So yeah,
I know that's. Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
I was just going to say that's definitely an interesting quality of the collaborative workspace, is just that you can get that sort of input more often. So I hope it's turning out well, but I don't know. We'll find out when it comes out. So.
Yeah, the pedal world is so interesting to me, because I mean, there are some processes that are basically the same, but the way different companies work it varies way more, I think, than like, I mean, I don't really know because I haven't worked directly in either of these industries, but it seems like auto industries kind of like build cars basically the same way. You know, they all do the assembly line. They all do, like, it all kind of is done roughly the same way. But pedals, while they're much simpler, and maybe this is why, you know, one guy might build it start to finish in his garage, you know, through hole by hand, blah, 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 does the whole thing himself. Another company might have everything delivered to them ready to go, and they, you know, QC it and send it out the door. It's just really, I've never seen so much variance for a similar outcome of product, which is kind of weird in my brain. I don't know where I'm going with this thought, but it's just a strange thought I had the other day.
Yeah, you're taking me along for the ride where I'm like, yeah, that is, I had not thought of that before, but it is interesting. And I wonder if it does just come from a place of like, if at some point, you know, the auto industry, or, you know, pick your major manufacturing industry, sort of, they all kind of saw each other's processes in a way where they all sort of tended toward this same point of like, this is a good way to make cars, you know? And in the world of effects pedals, it seems like it usually starts with that one person in their garage messing around with something. They're on a breadboard, or they're coding something strange, or whatever it is. It starts with that kind of that one person and their idea of like sort of the creative process. And so then you have this very strange mix of companies where, you know, like Old Blood, as we're growing, I think we're up to 11 people. I'd have to count now, but we're at like 10 or 12 people. And we start having to establish processes to help us get more efficient and consistent with certain things that we used to be able to relax on. Like as somebody running the inventory system, it's very interesting seeing how certain elements just can't really scale as well as others. You know, it can't be a group of people that are all kind of just building on their own pace. It has to be a much more managed, like, okay, you're going to need to build this. You're going to need to build this. It looks like we're low on this inventory parts. We need to specifically allocate it here, here, and here until the next batch comes in. And you have to start implementing more systems as it gets bigger. But at least in our case, the way that we implement systems is not to some industry standard. It's just to, you know, maybe we hear ideas from other companies, but it's really just about where are we trying to get, let's brainstorm a way to get there, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that I've taken a lot out of is, well, I've taken it out secondhand because I haven't read it myself, but Scott, I have referenced him on literally every episode because we talk almost every single day, but he's read the Toyota like lean manufacturing book, and he's always referencing things out of there. And I'm like, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Those Japanese people really got things figured out. They've got that whole manufacturing idea really dialed into a science. It's very interesting. You know, for somebody doing what you do, it might be a handy read one of these days. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I may have to go to it. Yeah.
I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure if you Google Toyota manufacturing book, it will come up. The great Google
I'm sure it's
machine
a very
knows
well referenced thing.
For sure. So
I just pulled out my phone as if I was about to Google Toyota book and like start reading it now. That's a funny reflex to have. So.
Well, you can. We should. Well, since we're talking about it so much, I wonder what it's called.
Let's just read it together here.
Yeah, we'll just read it. This will become a reading of the Toyota manufacturing book, which is called. Here it comes. No, what? Oh, come on, Google. You let me down. That's not what I want. Let's try that again. Here we go. The Toyota Way. There you go.
Ooh, the Toyota Way. There we go. All right.
At least that's the first thing that popped
supply
up.
chain oriented listeners can look up the Toyota Way.
The Toyota Way. So I was about to ask before we dove into that random segment. So what kind of gear are you playing these days? I know you're a gear nerd. You wouldn't listen to this podcast this often if you weren't. So tell me about it.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a like creative type nerd. It's always fascinating to hear different builders' approaches and stories and everything. I think especially this is a sidetrack. We'll get to the question, but especially like early on when I was starting to tinker around with stuff, and I mentioned that I read the Wampler books and then started listening to Chasing Tone, and I can't remember if I had already started listening to Tone Mob a little bit, but that kind of naturally linked to listening to both of those and just hearing, people like Joel or Robert Keeley or just I don't know all different people that have very different paths into it. It's always fascinating to listen to their processes. But so in terms of the actual gear that they make, I'm looking at my board right now. Like, what am I playing lately? I feel like, so I just got the Chase Bliss and Benson Automaton, which is, I mean, just amazing. It's I don't know how much time you've spent with it. I imagine some at least, but
A little tiny bit, not as much as you would think, but I hope to change that soon.
oh, it is. Yeah, it's just it's deep. There's a lot of the fact that the fuzz circuit is just a button that's like it's either off or on but gated, and it's like this. I'm not super well versed in fuzz facey type circuits, but it has that. I get the impression that it's like that, where it really cleans up with your volume and everything. And it's like you just hit a button and your fuzz is on. And it's this incredibly well voiced fuzz that plays differently with different pedals and guitars and everything. And it's just like that feature alone is like, man, they were really onto something with this. And then before that, I've got the Small Sound, Big Sound Mini, which is just super incredible preamp, like clean boost up to kind of fuzzy overdrive. I've got it just kind of doing the heavy boosting overdrive thing into the preamp right now. And then the Wampler dual fusion after that, because the left side of it, which is kind of Paisley Drive-esque, does this weird thing where it just like really crumbles under the weight of big overdrives going into it. And when I discovered that, I was like, normally I'd think put the kind of Tube Screamer-esque pedal like earlier, but just crushing it with multiple preamps is actually a lot of fun. So
Nice.
And then I've got the Ibanez swell flanger, which if anybody follows me on Instagram, I feel like they've seen those overdrives and that flanger just constantly. I feel like part of me just wants to make like an entire rock record with just that sound and just cleaning up with the volume knob, because there's a lot of fun to be had there. And then some sort of weirder stuff. I've got the Red Panda Lab Tensor right next to the Chase Bliss Mood, which is a little bit selfish because I worked on the left side of that pedal, but it's there's
right.
Still, it's one of those instances where it's like I'll play the delay or the reverb and be like, yeah, I guess it makes sense that I like that sound since I made it, and to get to interact with that and like all the clock control and the ramping functions and all the Chase Bliss stuff, and then also the Drolo looping side. Just it's just a really inspirational machine still that's just been on my board since it came out. And the Tensor kind of similar. Like I got one, put it on my board, and then it just hasn't left, just for weird sort of ambient, like just things happening below your signal, different reverse sounds and pitch shifting and tape, kind of slower, fast tape playback type sounds to kind of just exist underneath your playing. And I've been really into the Two Notes Cab M this year, because I've been in my apartment, and for months both me and my fiance were working here, so I was like all headphones when I was playing through stuff to not interrupt her workspace, because Old Blood, you hear noises all the time, but Big Brothers Big Sisters of Oklahoma, not so much. I'll sort of early on in quarantine, Two Notes put out a firmware update that added a preamp sim on top of the power amp and cab sims that were already in there, and that really pushed it over the edge into just this really incredible sounding headphone solution. So that's become kind of my go-to amp. Although I also have a Benson amp on the way at some point here, which once that arrives, I can't imagine I'm going to play anything else. But
What did you
can't rave
get?
on it yet. But I went with the Vincent.
Oh, my man.
Because yeah,
Nice.
I think you may have even been the first. Like, you posted a picture of the Vincent very early on in that, like, the forest green with the gold check and everything, and I was just like, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Not even having heard it, but just knowing, like, it's a Benson, it looks like that. And then hearing, like, you and other folks just using it and playing through it, it's like, yep, that's the sound and the look. So I've got I went with one of those.
Good man. Yeah, I know I'm incredibly biased, but that amp really, I mean, there's still amps I want with, like, that have very specific characters, but that amp really cured me. I haven't like super gassed hard for an amp. I still want an orange really bad. I still like a slow and or SLO. I don't know what the correct term is. Some of the higher gain stuff, 5150, things like that. I'd like to get some of that just because I listen to a lot of music that has that kind of sound, and I don't really have access to that. But the Vincent is the perfect amp for me, which is, I mean, why I was like, Chris, you should do this. It was entirely selfish.
That's right. Yeah, I forget. Yeah, because I forgot that was like kind of came from you, like pushing a Chimera with a Vinny, or just using the Vinny as like a preamp into another amp and being like, this is a sound. This is a very good sound.
Well, yeah, when he made the Vinny, I was like, hey, dude, do you think you can I know it's a 1-watt amp, but is it quiet? Like, I don't know anything about making amps, so this was just me spitballing. I was like, could you do an instrument level out? And I was more thinking for direct recording, which it works great for as well. But once I was like, wait a minute, this could be an overdrive pedal. And I was telling Chris about it. He's like, oh yeah, I found that the other day. It's fantastic. And yeah, then Vincent came along, and weirdly enough, my son Vincent we made the Vinny kind of in celebration of his birth, and he doesn't like to be called Vinny at all. He likes to be called Vincent. He gets really mad when you call him Vinny. And so he's probably going to try to lay claim to my Vincent number one of these days. So
it was meant to be that the Vincent would become an amp eventually. Because
But I think you're gonna be really happy with it. I think what is overlooked about it is you don't have to turn it up that loud. If you can, that's great. Obviously, that's a lot of fun. But I think you'll find that it's obviously not going to be as quiet as the 2-note situation, but being able to crank that Vinny into the Chimera and then just adjust the Chimera to wherever you need it to be, I think you're going to be really happy with that.
Yeah, I'm very excited to like explore it in a low volume situation for however long, and then eventually once we're able to play shows again, like take it to a plain speak practice and then just turn that volume knob up and see what happens there. I feel like it's gonna be I'm gonna have multiple revelatory experiences with this amp. So pretty stoked.
Yeah, the effects loop on it is a lot of fun, and that was another thing that I had to twist Chris' arm about. He finally because some effects loop give it that whooshy sound, and this doesn't do that because essentially it's not really a traditional effects loop. It's just in between the two amps, so it's a little bit different, and it works really well. So that's nice. Our big Vincent commercial for today.
For sure. Yeah. I was just looking at my board and I realized that I also forgot to plug the Strymon Flint, which for just reverb and tremolo, that was another pedal that I just put on my board, and it's just always on because my amps don't have reverb and tremolo, and it's just that perfect. Like, you need a little bit of each of those. This is that sound, and then more importantly, I've got a Visitor right before that. And so I thought I should have mentioned, that I'm also using the Old Blood Noise Visitor as like a last in chain modulation, which is really fun with having like a phaser and a chorus at the end, just giving it suddenly like all this like space and widening and movement and everything. So I felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't plug the fact that, an Old Blood pedal was like right there too.
Yeah, probably a good idea. Brady will probably like that. It's good.
You're welcome, Brady.
You're welcome, Brady. So that does lead me to another question I wanted to ask you. What is your favorite Old Blood pedal? Is it the Visitor?
Yeah, I was gonna say. So I've got the Visitor on my board right now. It's I have it at the end of my chain, and it just gives it extra. Yeah, I feel like it's so funny. I should have like a quick answer to this question, but I think I'm definitely really into the Visitor right now, and I feel like Dweller has this weird quality of just being. It may not be the pedal I play most of hours, which probably the one I play the most is actually the Black Fountain, because you can just leave it on as like a kind of doubling delay and it just thickens everything up. Which that's fun because that's a design that was from before I worked at Old Blood, and then just recently we've updated it with like tap tempo and just kind of expanded the time range a little bit, and I was able to implement those changes, and so it was a real fun experience to go back, 6 years after having worked with the company for 5 years and having developed all this new knowledge to apply some of it to that sound that I already loved. So yeah, I feel like that's probably the one I've used the most. But then the one that's kind of my baby is the Dweller, just because I think it represents a time where I felt confident that, like, I still have imposter syndrome constantly, as I'm sure so many of us do. But that was a moment where I felt like this really sounds different. Like, I don't know anything that sounds like Dweller, and I don't know if people are going to like it or not, but I at least feel comfortable that it will put people in a new headspace when they play around with it. So that's kind of my go-to. Like, it just, I don't play it that often, but usually when I do, it's just like, yeah, this is a sound that I just don't hear anywhere else. So I really appreciate it for that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That out of all the pedals, I mean, I have the Dark Star, and that's the one that like I think about just because it's the one I own. But the Dweller is probably the one that put me the most out there when I played it. I was like, whoa. I was like, we got some exploring to do. Like, this one gets out there, man. So yeah, I get it. I think you're right. That would be the one that puts people in a different headspace. And that's saying something for the Old Blood family of effects. That's
yeah, we have a lot of those types of sounds. That's just the one that still surprises me to this day and feels like it feels like you really have to reckon with it.
You do. You got to be prepared. You got to be prepared to dwell. It's a fun time. Well, let's see. How much time do we got here? Okay. Yeah, we still have a little bit of time. What is this is a fun one for industry people, I think. What is your favorite NAMM memory?
Ooh. Okay, it's actually from, I thought it was going to be hard, and then somehow immediately I was like, nope, that's the one. It was, because it was earlier this year, so it was the NAMM in Anaheim in January, which I went to. I guess we met back at the Winter NAMM when we did the like open call coffee and riffs at Windsor Homebrew in Costa Mesa. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we actually met there, but I know we were at least both there. And it's funny to think back on that being like I had just joined the company. I don't know if I'm assuming Tone Mob had started at that point, but it was probably new as well.
It was really new. And that was my first ever, like, quote unquote industry meetup ever.
Okay. So
yeah,
same.
I didn't know anybody. I mean, I knew the 60 Cycle guys because I had done the podcast with them. I knew the Sinusoid guys a little bit. We had done some giveaways and stuff, but we hadn't like talked in depth. And who else did I know? That's pretty much it. And like Jess and Leon and I were just like, here we are. We don't know what we're doing, but here we are. And then like I brought all this gear because I wasn't really sure what was going on. And I was like, and then like it kind of started with like, I was told like, yeah, do a jam in A and we're going to layer over the top of it. And so I just kind of did these drony chords. And then like I watched back on the video and was like, oh, that's not what ended up happening. So I just kind of sound like I didn't do anything. But yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm just
oh no, that's
back
totally fine. I had a moment of like, I've only been to 2 of the winter NAMs. I've been to a few summer NAMs and some deli stomp boxes and other, industry events, but that was my first ever industry event. And I just realized, oh wait, you were there too. I think we were both sort of early on in our explorations of this crazy pedal world.
Yep.
But so then, yeah, fast forwarding from January 2016 to January 2020, I mentioned earlier that I've been a huge fan of Blur since like middle school and have really grown to appreciate a lot of Graham Coxon's guitar playing. And I was just wandering around at this NAMM and just ran into him. Like he was over near the Reverend booth and I was at Rev or I don't know. It was somewhere nearby and I just like glanced over and it's like Fully Alone is Graham Coxon, one of my like guitar hero guys. And I just sort of like almost blacked out, just walked over and was like, hi, shook his hand. I was like, big fan. And then we just ended up talking about some of the Reverend guitars and stuff, just chatting for a few minutes while I was thinking like, this is really surreal. I've met a lot of people that I'm fans of, and I try to keep, it's kind of an old blood joke of Dano Fano is the guy that like gets overly excited when like a band is coming to visit. It's like, oh, I used to listen to them in high school or things like that. So I always try to keep Dano Fano at bay and just like have, Dan from Old Blood talk to the person. And this was like the closest I've gotten to Dano Fano just really taking over.
Oh, no.
But we ended up just talking about some guitars and things. And I was like, well, anyway, just really good to meet you. Just huge fan. Just felt like I had to say hi. And then I feel this hand on my shoulder and I turn and it's like, oh, there's a security guy. And he's like, hey, can you scoot out of the aisle? And so me and Graham Coxon both scoot a little further into the Reverend booth. And then Stevie Wonder and his entourage walk by. And I just had this moment of like, I'm meeting one of my guitar heroes and the like cap off to the story is the fact that Stevie Wonder walked by. It was just like, this is officially the most surreal thing I've experienced as a person in this industry.
That's amazing. So, that is incredible.
There's been, so many good times with industry folks and artists and just, we could go down a rabbit hole of all the good NAMM memories, but that's just one that's so surreal to me. That's like, yep, that's the one.
That's tough to beat. That's a good NAMM memory right there. And that's like why we suffer through the event, I think. Is to hopefully have a little glimmer of some of that in our lives. Last NAMM, it's funny, we both had this happen at the last NAMM, which feels like it was 3 years ago, by the way. It was in January, but wow, it feels like forever ago.
Yeah.
Jess and I were riding. I can't remember if we were riding. Yeah, we were riding down an escalator. I can't remember. We were riding down or up an escalator, and we were kind of by ourselves. And out of nowhere, there's this man coming up the opposite way, pointing at us and yelling. And I'm like, what? And we look, and it's Jeff Garlin, and he just pointed at us and shouted, you two men enjoy your beards, and just and scooted on by. And I was like, was that Jeff Garlin? And it was Jeff Garlin. It was definitely Jeff Garlin. It was like, wow, that only at NAMM. It was amazing.
That's amazing. I love that Jeff Garlin is able to give that moment to people too. Like he knows if he yells a goofy thing at a couple people, there's a good chance that they will recognize him and just walk away with this incredible memory of like, I cannot believe.
Yeah. Jess saw him later, like in the back of the Gibson booth, and he's like, I'm sorry, I hate to do this, but you did yell at me on the escalator. Can I please get a selfie? And he's like, okay, real quick, but don't let anybody else see you. So yeah, Good time. But man, I don't know. Stevie Wonder is Stevie Wonder. Oh, sidebar on Stevie Wonder before we got to go. Have you heard the celebrity rumor that Stevie Wonder's not actually blind? He's just pretending.
I have. That's been a group discussion rabbit hole at Old Blood before. In fact, like I feel like I've ended up in that discussion a few times of like, you go down that rabbit hole of like, yeah, why is he holding the camera? Or how did he know this thing? Or like, how did he catch that mic stand?
That mic stand, that's the one that stood out. I was like, how did he? If he didn't know that was coming, how did he catch the mic stand? How did he do it, Stevie? What are you hiding?
Such a crazy conspiracy where it's like, I'm just going to roll with like, no, Stevie Wonder's blind. I will accept that. I will trust Stevie Wonder. But that is pretty weird.
Yeah. You feel exactly the same way I feel. I don't really think that he's not blind, but there are sure some strange coincidences occasionally. Maybe he just got superhuman, you know?
That's exactly
Daredevil
what I was going to say. He may just be superhuman.
I mean, he isn't.
If the music is any indication, then he's probably
exactly. Superhuman. I was like, he's definitely superhuman in at least one way. What's to stop him from having radar sense?
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, we've got a couple classic questions to wrap up on, so let's do this thing. What do you say?
Let's do it. Okay.
First of all, here's your billboard opportunity. This is where you can put out whatever you want to put out into the world, say what you want to say, and this is your chance to do it.
You know, I've heard you give this opportunity to many other people, but I didn't even think about it this morning of like, what would I put on my billboard? Yeah, I don't know if I have anything other than just like being good to each other and being good to yourself and trying to do the thing that feels authentically you. Like that, a lot of our discussion has been about the weird ways we and others end up in the music industry. And so there's definitely sort of something to be said there for like, keep working, keep trying to put yourself in situations where you can have an opportunity to explore the things that are really important to you. And then just like along the way, be good to other people. You know, we're in an industry that is mostly full of really great people that are truly supportive of each other. And we all want each other to do well. You know, it's an industry where kind of the better each company does, the better we all do, you know, it's just to grow together. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think it's just important for people to remember that, like wherever they are, to just be kind to people all along the way, which is very, I don't know. There's not a lot of insight in that, but it's just something I think is important to say when you get a moment of like, what's the important thing? Well, be good to yourself and be good to those around you. That's really what it boils down to.
I think we need a little extra reminder of that this year. Maybe not the people who listen to this podcast so much, but maybe the people who do listen to this podcast. I don't know. All the listeners that have ever reached out to me have been super cool, so I feel like they already know. But I think it's an important thing for people to say, and it's easy to not have that be top of mind and be driving down the road and be like, this idiot is doing XYZ. I'm gonna blah. And it's like, you know, that guy, maybe he's an idiot, or maybe he's just having a bad day. He's probably just having a bad day, most likely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like it. All right, here we go to less serious stuff. What's your favorite boss pedal?
Okay, so this one I did think about a little bit. So I'm realizing that I don't actually have, like, I haven't played a lot of boss pedals except briefly. I guess I should say I haven't really owned a lot of boss pedals. I've owned, you know, a TU2, and I'm blanking on anything else except the CS2, the older compressor, which I've had for probably a decade. That was one of my early purchases of like maybe 2009-ish, like somewhere around there, where I was first reading like effects pedal forums and stuff and starting the deep dive of like, wow, this world of boutique pedals and vintage pedals, and there's so many pedals out there. And a lot of people were swearing by the CS2 at that time, and I'm sure a lot of people still do, but it was like, yeah, CS3, it's like a different circuit. It's just not the same thing. But the CS2 just has this like this really warm, squishy, like I can't really describe it, but like literally just turn every knob all the way up, and it's loud and kind of messy, but really lovely, and put that into like an overdrive or something. And there's just something really, really special about that. So that's the Boss pedal that I've owned for a long time and still haven't. I've played a lot of other compressors that I really like, but none of them sound like that one. You know, it's much more of a character compressor. I think it's not going to be the transparent tonal enhancer, but it does the thing it does very well. And then also shout out to the VB2, which is a pedal I still have yet to play, but the amount of times that I've heard it and gone, either that VB2 sounds incredible, or, oh, that sound is incredible, I wonder what that guitar player was using, and then landing at the spot of, oh, apparently it was a VB2. That is just like a really magical vibrato pedal that I really need to play someday. I should actually get one now that the Waza reissues exist.
Yeah, me too. I've never actually played one either, but I've had similar experiences to yourself. Like, oh, well, that's what that is. All right, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
it's
noted.
Yeah, it's so many points along the way. It was like I was watching Dawes live, and my buddy Tyler was like, there was a sound, and he was like, that VB2 sounds so good, and I wouldn't have known what it was, but he pointed out, and I was like, oh man, you're right, it does. And then like, I don't know if you listen to the band Midnight Oil at all, but they put out like a live, I think a double album a year or two ago that there's a lot of VB2 all over it. But it was, again, a situation of, man, this guy's guitar sound is incredible. I really wonder what he's using, and especially that vibrato sound. And it's like, yep, it was the VB2 yet again. So.
There it is. Keeps coming back. Yeah, we got to do ourselves a favor and snatch one up here pretty soon. Okay, final question. Here we go. And you know what it is.
I know what it is.
What's your favorite kind of pizza?
Good question. I would like to explore this in 3 parts.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Not really. Well, maybe we could. I don't know. It's just a tough choice because I've gotten really into making pizza over the last like year and a half or so.
Which is exactly why I wanted to talk to you about this.
Okay. So we can dive into it. Yeah, because I was given a book for Christmas by Ken Forkish, who's a Portland guy. I think you've talked about these. I'm blanking on any of his places, but he multiple pizzerias in
Checkerboard Pizza is probably my favorite pizza spot in Portland, and it's a Forkish offshoot.
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then I think Ken's Artisan was the place that I went. We visited Portland a while back and went to Ken's Artisan with a friend of ours, and then later I was like, oh wait, Ken Forkish, Ken's Artisan, this is that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but exactly.
His book on just making pizza is like just perfect. Like we followed the directions, and suddenly we're making these really incredible at-home pizzas. So I feel like first shout out is just to a classic margarita pizza, because when we pull that off with just like basic tomato sauce, fresh mozzarella and basil, and everything lands right with the dough from scratch and just everything along the way. It's like, it's such a magical thing where the ingredients are so simple and minimal, but it just, everything works together. You know, it's the classic. And then a recent discovery was pepperoni and basil together, kind of inspired by the idea of putting the basil on at the end. So like, we'll cook a straightforward pepperoni pizza with just a bunch of pepperoni that's cut in a way that it'll curl up. And so just, you know, dough, like a kind of New York-ish, you know, like thinner, just like hand-stretched dough, tomato sauce, mozzarella, pepperoni, and then right when it comes out of the oven, throw basil on it. And there's something about the basil and pepperoni. This was like just maybe only a few weekends ago. My fiance and I were like, oh my gosh, basil and pepperoni is a thing. I did not know. But then to actually like pick a favorite, it's kind of an experiential favorite. And it's this Detroit style pizza from a place called Cottage Inn that is at least available in Michigan. I don't know how regional it is. It doesn't make it down to Oklahoma, but it's in Michigan. So I'm not sure how far outside of Michigan it goes. But this was like, so I met my fiance when we were both going to Michigan State, and she's originally from Ann Arbor, and it was like fairly early on, meeting her parents in Ann Arbor, like on a pizza night. They ordered this chicken Mediterranean pizza from Cottage Inn, and so it's like that kind of Detroit style, like pan, thicker crust with the like really caramelized edge from the olive oil, and it's got mozzarella, chicken, banana peppers, feta, and then like an herb shake, and sesame seeds around the crust. So just this really excellent like delivery pizza. You go to the Chenevier house, it's pizza night, good chance you're going to get, at least if Haley and I are there, we're going to suggest you get a chicken Mediterranean pizza. But you can't get it down here. And so on her birthday this year, I was like, let me see how close I can get with the pan pizza recipe from Ken Forkish and just the knowledge of the toppings and everything. And somehow magically we pretty much nailed it. And so now we've done it many times since then, and are just like so proud of this Detroit style chicken Mediterranean pizza that it's like, I don't even know if it's my favorite pizza, but it's almost like how Dweller isn't necessarily my favorite pedal, but it's the one I want to tell people about. This chicken Mediterranean pizza that we make. It's like, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I just want to tell you this story of how it's from a delivery place that we loved in Michigan and can't get it here. So we just figured out how to make it and we got real close.
I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. I feel kind of similarly about some of my barbecue experiments. I like very much just trying to replicate what I had in Memphis. And sometimes I pull it out and I'm like, you did it. You did it.
By God, you've done it.
So yeah, I understand the feeling. I do. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this chat like I knew that I would.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was good to just chat for a while about gear and food and everything. Yeah. Perfect. All right, everybody. For Dan, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones. All right, that happened. We did it, and we did it successfully with no smoky interruptions like I was, not going to lie, slightly concerned about, considering all the goings-ons and what happened when Seth and Brady came on last time. If you haven't heard that episode, slide back. It's actually a really good episode, even though, some insanity happened in the middle of that recording. So if you go Google Old Blood Noise Tone Mob, I'm positive that will come up. So go check that out. That's a really good episode as well. And if you want more content with Dan, you can go to patreon.com/tonemob. And like I said in the intro, for just $5 a month, you'll help support the show and get extra content. So if that's a thing you like, patreon.com/tonemob is the place you go. If that doesn't work, please share this with people that you care about. Share it with your gear nerd community, whatever community that might be a part of. That might be some random Facebook group. It might be some forum that you're on. It might be your buddies that you drink beer with. I don't know who it is, but you've got gear nerd friends most likely, and they need to know about this show. They need to. They just need to. Okay, I don't know if they need to, but I would really appreciate it if you would share it with them. That would help me out immensely. Like immensely. Every download honestly means a whole lot to a podcaster, and it's just literally how we pay the bills. So thank you very much for everybody that has done that. Please share this with a friend if you can. All right, I'm going to sign off now. You can get to another show. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're fine, and I hope you're happy, and I hope this was a fun episode for you. All right, talk to you next time. Bye-bye. One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get
some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style. Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gun Street as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gun Street harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.